Now let's go to the drums. So as I said, I was auditioning. I auditioned different kicks and different snares for this before I recorded it to know, what was going to sound better, which is something I don't normally like to do. I don't like to get super technical and finicky with stuff. I just like to sit down and play it and have it done. It's more about the song for me than the other stuff. Although, like, you know, clearly obsessed with mixing, but it's the engineering side I don't really have a lot of fun with, like setting stuff up. Um, so here would be me experimenting um, with my 24-inch Mapex kick with the same mic setup as what I ended up using, just a different bass drum. So this is the tone that I auditioned, and it looks like I processed it all the way to completion just to see what it would sound like against the song. Um, and that's an awesome kick tone. I really like that. But when I compared it to my 26-inch, I just found that my 26-inch kick had more character to it, and because it's such a simple song and simplistic parts, it was actually adding something to the song. Whereas this is a bit more of a metal kick, metal sounding kick, where it's like clicky and punchy and stuff like that, which is great, but it just didn't really fit the song as well. The kick sound that we ended up with sounded like this. So that's the kick sound it ended up with. It's just a bit more, it's a bit softer sounding, but it's a bit more interesting sounding and a bit more timelessy sounding as well. So one thing that happened was I had Mike from Rogue Planet master this song. The version we're listening to now is the unmastered version, and so he does tend to make things really, really loud. I remember when I got it back, when I'd pull it into something, it was actually clipping the output. Like, and I've seen him argue before that that doesn't matter. Like, if it sounds good, it sounds good. But when you look at Spotify's algorithm and YouTube's algorithm and stuff like that, they say to make sure you leave like a dB at least of headroom. Otherwise, anything that's up there kind of gets bit crushed or ruined. And it's kind of subtle, but I would rather take what they're telling me and give my song the greatest chance of actually sounding good. So when I got it back, I ended up pulling it into Pro Tools, the master file, and just pulling it down a dB so that that wouldn't happen. But there was also, because I think he'd carved out a bit of the low mid area. When the drums first come in the softer part, in this section here, the drums in the master file just sounded a bit too scooped, and it didn't really suit that section just because of the overall processing he'd done. So what I ended up doing was, in the master file, I cut that section out of the song, and I just remixed that section with a new different drum tone, and then bounced that section out of the song, and then pulled it into the master file and stitched it back in with crossfades. So when you're listening to the finished version of Castle, there's two different mixes in there. There's one that's mastered by Mike, which is the majority of the song, but the start of the song is my master, which I'd stitched in afterwards, which is something I often do because I can't leave well enough alone. So for this version here, what I've done is I just pulled in that drum mix that I did from the other session. I've just pulled it in as a stem, so you can hear. I keep doing that because that's what you do with Reaper. All right. So this is the different drum mix. Actually, what I'll do is I'll play this bounce drum mix for the verse, and then I will let it go into the chorus where the original drum mix comes in. They're just a little bit different. How do you do? Is it that here? Yeah, right. So you can hear that those two drum tones are actually quite different, and I probably like the later one that I did to stitch in to the intro, just because I'd had a bit of time to learn what I didn't like about the other one. But this was just a quick drum mix. I think I did it probably in 10 minutes, stitched it back in, and I liked it a lot. So another thing about this drum recording was I had the drums set up in a kitchen, but I didn't want to bring my computer and everything up from my bedroom. So I had the cables go all the way from the kitchen into my bedroom, and it was just recording with my computer in the bedroom. So I'd have to run down to my bedroom, press record, run up to the drum kit, and do a take, which meant like I'm not going to be doing part by part. I'm just going to be doing full takes because I can't be running back and forth. Which is why, some of the parts from chorus to chorus are a bit different, a bit improv-y, because I was just thinking on the fly and playing on the fly. And the other thing was I just bought these hardware EQs, like the API that I mentioned, and I really wanted to use the hardware on the way in, but because the computer and the hardware was so far away, I couldn't keep going back and forth to make those adjustments. So I just recorded everything into the computer completely dry. There was no processing or anything. And then on the mix, I used only plugins, whereas the other songs on this record, I did use a lot of hardware, but this mix actually just still sounds a lot better, even though that it's all plugins. So I don't know. I don't know if hardware does as much as some people think it does. Like, it's fun to play with and all that kind of stuff, but it's not completely necessary, I don't think. Okay. So there is one interesting thing about this drum recording here. You see this channel called Trigger, and I learnt this trick off Daniel Bergstrand, who recorded like the Soil Work and the In Flame stuff. So you get a D drum trigger that people typically use to put on a drum and then send to a sampler to make a drum sample. There's no drum samples whatsoever on this recording, but that trigger actually has a stick-on transducer microphone in it to send the signal. So all it's picking up is just like this click sound of impact because it's stuck against the head of the drum. But he actually uses that sound to blend in with the snare or the kick, just to give it an extra snap, because it's a really snappy, it's not a nice sound, but it's just all attack. And it kind of sounds like you're compressing the snare drum a lot. Like if you blend it in with the snare top mic, it just sounds like the snare top is compressed and it's like that pop comes through. So if you blend that in, it actually sounds really cool. I will show you what the trigger sounds like on its own. Hilarious, right? It sounds bad. It's just like on the rim of the drum. You can hear a little bit of the bleed of the cymbals in there, like not much. I've got it gated for whatever reason. But it just sounds, it makes the rim shots sound more rim shotty because it's that really rimmy sound. I've got this time adjuster on it. I've moved it 10 samples. forwards, because a transducer will pick up the signal before a microphone will, because it's closer and it's just an instant click. Just adjust it at 10 samples so that it kind of hits at the same time as the snare top, the snare microphone. That's all that's doing. I cut out all the low end. Which I actually don't mind that low rumble there, but I kind of just wanted to use it for that clicky stuff up the top. I've got a limiter on it, just to catch the really loud ones, because it tends to be really inconsistent, as you can see. It moves around a lot more than a snare mic would. And then that's just me setting the level. And then that EQ is doing nothing. So let's listen to the snare top by itself, and then I will turn on the snare trigger as well. The snare top. I really like that snare sound. So I'm going to play it again now, and then I'll turn the trigger on. So I don't know if you could hear that, but it just adds a bit more snap to it. So I'm going to loop a snare drum here. How do you loop on Pro Tools? I can't remember. I'll loop the snare drum and turn that trigger on and off so you can hear it. It makes a big difference. It's kind of awesome. I haven't done this since because I ended up selling the trigger because it was just another annoying thing to set up that I didn't think it was necessary. But I really like it on this. I'll turn it up and exaggerate it so you can hear it some more. That's great. I really like it. So that's what's happening. So now that we've done that, let's actually look at the snare top mic. So it's gated a bit. I didn't want to gate this all the way so that there was no bleed. I actually wanted the bleed because the song's such a simple thing that the bleed kind of sounded nice, and the kitchen was actually, it had a nice ambient sound to it for the drums. And there, because of the tempo, there's a part in the bridge where I'm just riding on the crash, and I wanted that crash sound to be a bit more mono, so you could hear the crash bursting through in the center a bit more, so I could have the guitars on the left and right really loud and the drums more mono. So this is the snare top mic. So yeah, a lot of bleed in it, but it sounds great. That's my Black Beauty snare before I put die-cast hoops on it. So those are the triple flange hoops, and it's got a nice resonance to it, and it's actually in tune with the song. I'll save up my heart. So it's like a G sharp, I suppose. Yeah, so I could have it more resonant but still fit in with the song really well there. So this is that API EQ, which I wanted to use the hardware version of, so I just used the plugin version. Boosting a bunch of 12.5K and a bunch of 2.5K as a shelf. So I'll turn that off and on. So yeah, that makes a huge difference. I might actually turn all the processing off the snare. So that's how it came in, which is still pretty good. I think we're hearing a bit of processing off of the snare bus. Well, maybe not. Okay, so that's how it came in. I was doing this tape machine thing a lot at the time. makes it sound a bit closer and a little bit brighter. It's just like a little cheat I do to make stuff sound a bit brighter. And then here's a lot of EQ going on here, so I'll turn this off and on. And the main thing you will hear is me manufacturing this low punch here. If I turn it off, it'll be very thin sounding. Yeah, so that makes it a lot thicker. So with snare drums, I'll always have a look at the spectrum analyzer and see where the low fundamental of the snare actually is. I know a lot of people will just boost a 200 hertz bell, and that would have actually worked for this snare drum because of the tuning. But a lot of the time, you know, if you've got a lower tuned snare, the low end could be all the way down here, or if your snare's tuned higher, it could be all the way up there. So you're not exclusively, if you're doing like just a wide bell thing, you're not exclusively just boosting the area that you want to boost. So I'll always make sure I look at what I'm doing here. So you'll see this is right in the area of that low punch, and it's just a narrow bell, so I'm just pulling that up. These are just some resonance I was pulling out. Like I said, I tuned the snare to the key of the song, and I wanted that note to be prominent, but I didn't want any other overtones that were out of tune to come through, so I pulled them out, which I probably wouldn't do now. I would just leave them in because I think those overtones actually sound pretty nice. I'll take them off and you'll hear the difference. So it just makes it sound slightly drier and a bit tighter with them on, but it's not a big enough difference to go through and do that. I wouldn't do that now. And I believe this is probably actually the note, where the note is coming through, the G sharp, and I'm probably just trying to accentuate that. Let's have a listen. Yeah, it is. It's a higher octave of that G sharp, and I'm just trying to pull that up, and then just a bit more bite there, and there was probably just a bit too much snare bottom rattle there that I've pulled out. Okay, and then we've got this VMR, and okay, doing this virtual channel thing. Seems to be a common theme on this mix, just trying to get a lot of harmonic color to stuff. And then a distressor on 6:1, compressing it a bit just to give it that nice, squishy, punchy sound. So it's just doing a little bit, but I love that distressor squish where it sounds like it's sucking the thing in it and just like spitting it back out really hard. I love that. Alright, and then just a bit more overall presence there, and then a limiter. At this time I seem to be really worried about stray peaks and kind of keeping everything in balance there, but it would have been fine without that. It's not a huge deal there. Alright, and then on the snare bass, there's nothing going on the snare bass, just another limiter. And it's not actually catching it and limiting it all the time, it's just stopping the stray peaks. Alright, now a huge part of this drum sound was this ribbon mic, which was just like a room mic just in front of the kit. Alright, so this ribbon mic is a huge part of the drum sound. It gives it that nice overall kit sound that glues everything together and just has that cool ambience. So yeah, I wanted all that crash in there just to pull the crash a bit more into the center so that the overheads didn't sound unnaturally wide. That's pretty much what I'll always use a mono room mic for, is just kind of pulling everything back into the center, because that sounds a bit nicer to me, and you can have the guitars up a bit louder. Alright, so let's see what we got going on. A little bit of this top end here, and a bit harmonics there. We'll turn that off. Just a little bit of brightening there, and then yeah, this is where the main EQ is happening. So I didn't want any kick drum in this microphone because the kick is hard to get in phase in this microphone with all the other like 40 kick mics I have going on. So I just completely got rid of it, and depending on where you move this here, the phasing with the snare will be different. So I'll actually have the snare top playing, and I'll move this around and flip the polarity until it sounds really in tune and really punchy with the snare mic, and it ended up being there that it sounded really good against the snare top mic. And then that's just me boosting that G sharp again, just accentuating the tune, the resonance of that snare drum, pulling it out some other resonances. I would say those would be cymbals there. Yeah, they're nasty resonances when the crash hits. And some overall brightening, and then just chopping the super high end off. I think the hi-hats can get a bit wild up there in a ribbon mic sometimes, so I've just pulled that off. And then just another high shelf. I think that's just for when... Yeah, that's just for the bridge to get some more crash. Yeah, it's not on in the choruses. So that's the ribbon mic. Alright, and then there's a snare expander mic, which I'm trying to think what this would be. I think this is just a really cheap condenser, a mono condenser, in the middle of the room, pretty far away from the kit, and it would just be, I don't know if it's just gated to open when the snare hits or what. No, it's just turned on all the time. So that's that, and I talked about it in the last video, that mid-range puh sound I always want. That's what this mic is trying to do, and to pull the ambience of the drums back in the center. I just like that mono ambience on drums. Sounds pretty cool. Yeah, the snare sounds cool and powerful on that mic. So just pulling out a couple of resonances there. I don't know if that... No, that doesn't come on later. And then that's the puh there, that's 700 hertz. Sounds completely boring with it off, it just sounds like a dead snare. With it on, it sounds awesome. I'll actually play that with the snare drum, snare top, so you can hear the difference it makes. Yeah, it just puts it in a room and makes, and because it's mono, it's kind of like, it's not distracting or anything, it kind of just sounds like it's a part of the snare top mic. Cool. And then it's got this EQ, so just making sure no low kicks coming through it, or all the cool ambience from the snare drum is in this area. I didn't really need the crashes coming through it. I don't think the crashes would sound very good in this mic because it's a cheap condenser. Alright, and then there's these ambient mics, stereo mics, and they were down the hallway going off the kitchen. Another thing I'll always do is just putting drum mics really far away from the kit to act as reverb. And I don't know if these are just gated to open when the snare hits or what's going on, but we'll find out. Yeah, they're gated just to open when the snare hits. So it's similar sound to that snare expander, that mono one. Same thing, it's just further away, so when you put them together, it's just like an extra long reverb. And we'll turn the snare top on again, and you can hear those two mics going on. Yeah, they do a lot. And those were just Rode mics, just cheap Rode condensers. And wow, a lot of EQ. Yeah, I think the hallway that it was in was like very narrow, so there must have just been a lot of weird resonances happening. Let's see what happens if I turn that off. Yeah, it's just a bit honky with all that stuff on. It probably didn't need that much. That's a bit wild, but once you start, I guess you can't stop. And then that would be for the crash cymbals, just when it's opening and I'm playing on a crash. I don't want that harsh crash to come through and kind of be distracting when the snare hits, because it's only opening when the snare hits. So those are the ambient mics, and they are both bussed into this amb mics channel, which is where the gate is happening there. I'm boosting another 12 dB of that 700 Hertz right there, so we'll turn that on off. But that's my sound right there. It's just that mid-range in the snare. Boosting some more of it there, cutting out some cymbals. Cool. Alright, and then the drum rooms were KM 184 Neumann mics, just pointed towards the back walls, probably like 12 feet away from the kit, facing away from the kit. They sound like this. Like best drum room mics I've ever had, and it's recorded in a kitchen. So for whatever reason, that kitchen rips. And see, let's see what's going on with it. Yep, that's that. Just getting some more harmonics. That doesn't really do anything. If I turn it off and on, you won't hear anything. This tape. Again, doesn't do a lot, just helps with some harmonic stuff and pulling it a bit closer. Okay, boosting a lot of low end. I wanted a lot of low end in these rooms, it looks like. Yeah, so that's kind of that area that's coming through those ambient snare mics. I didn't want it so much in these closer rooms. I just wanted the closer rooms to be a bit more chunky and full. Kind of helps separate them from those other room mics, because there's so many room mics going on. They've all got to have a distinct sort of purpose, I suppose. Cool. Nothing really interesting going on there. Alright. So now let's look at the overheads. So I can tell I haven't done much processing to those overheads, which is strange for me, but it sounds good, sounds nice and splashy. Those would be the C414 AKG mics, just hovering above the kit. I kind of just, with those mics, I kind of just slap them up there wherever, because they're such large diaphragm, you know, whatever's going to happen is kind of going to happen in those mics anyway. So there's the hat side and the ride side. So the hat side, that's the processing, just notching out some cymbal stuff. And then the ride side is probably the same. Except it didn't need that thing. That must just be happening in the hi-hat, whereas this one's not picking up that much hi-hat there, so it didn't need it. I guess I'll turn those on and off so you can hear. Just tidies them up a bit. And they're filtered so that there's no low end in them. Again, when I have the cymbal mics, I just want to be able to pull that channel up and just get more cymbals or less cymbals. I don't want to be like, I need more cymbals, but when I pull the mic up, the kick doesn't sound as good. Like, These are just for cymbals. So they're being bussed here, and I'm doing some more processing. So that's where I'm pulling out all the low end and a bit more of that goofy sounding sound that you don't need in cymbals. I'll try and show you that. Yeah, I didn't really need that, so I pulled that out there. That must be a bad resonance in the snare drum. Got this tape that I put on everything. I pretty much put tape on every channel. Yeah, just kind of boosting the overheads up in this area, this 12K area, just to kind of fill out the spectrum. If your cymbals are kind of, the high end's based around this 5K area, there's a lot of build up there because, you know, the guitar amps have a lot of that area, and that's kind of where your mix is going to sound focused, and you don't really want that. So, or I don't really want that. So I'll kind of try and focus my cymbals up higher so my guitars can have plenty of this and everything else can have plenty of that, my vocals or whatever, and then my cymbals kind of just sit up here, and it kind of just balances out the spectrum. Because there's not a lot of instruments that have heaps of stuff going on up here, so I want most of the information in the cymbals to be up there. And that EQ is doing nothing, and then that's just for me to set the level of the overheads. Alright, let's have a look at the kick drum. So there's a lot of sources for the kick drum here. There's this D12 mic, which is like a vintage AKG mic from the 50s. I think it's like a box looking mic, and the low end in it isn't great, but it's got a really cool character in the mid range. So it's, as I've been talking, it's a common theme with me is like, instead of going for something that's overall pretty good, I'll grab something, or I'll go for a tone where a particular part of it is really good, and I'll kind of carve everything else away and use that particular part that's really good, and then make up the rest of the sound with a different source. So with this D12, I've pulled all of the low end out, and it's just a high end sort of knocky sound. It sounds like this. And that's just a mic out in front of the head. It's not inside the head. It's just sitting out the front of my 26-inch kick, just to try and get that knocky, less clicky sound. And that's where I'm pulling all the low end out of it. And then we've got this harmonics, and then some tape. Makes it a bit brighter. But then, yeah, this is where all the stuff's happening. So there's some funny stuff going on in this mic. There's a few areas where there's just these massive valleys, these dips in the frequencies. And because it's old, there's probably something going on with it that's not right. So I'll always have to kind of do that in that area. No matter what the source is, that is kind of just always pulled down. And when you boost it back up, it doesn't sound bad. It sounds good. It's just kind of not there. And yeah, there must have been a lot of bad resonances in this kick sound. So I'll turn this EQ on and off so you can hear what's going on. Yeah, it sounds a lot nicer on. You're kind of hearing a lot of those bouncy overtones when I turn these off, and a lot of cool kick drum sounds do have those bouncy overtones in them, like a lot of Eric Valentine stuff does. But for this, I didn't want that. I just wanted something a bit more solid sounding, so I've pulled that out and then kind of overall just sculpted that area the way I wanted it to sound. And then this is just me pulling out a bunch of 200 Hertz. I'll show you that on and off. Yeah, I just didn't really need that in this channel. And then that is just doing that again after all the processing. You know, it brings that, starts bringing that up again. I just want to make sure it wasn't there. And then just another resonance. And then so there's more brightness happening on the kick bus afterwards. So on the kick, alright, we'll get to that in a bit, but first we'll look at these sub kicks, which are just NS10 speakers, one in the box and one out of the box, and you just it's easy to do. You can do it with any speaker. You just reverse the wiring on them, and instead of being speakers, they become microphones. But then you need some kind of pad to plug it into before you go into your preamp, because they're really, really sensitive and really loud. So the sub kick that's in a box, I've written here, I think this is the first recording where I used these actually, is focus more around that 100 hertz, the 80 to 100 hertz area, really punchy, and that sounds like this. So great punchy low in there, and I've really sculpted it. This is something I don't do anymore. I kind of just leave them be a little bit more, but I knew that I wanted this kick drum focused in a certain area, and I just sculpted around it to make that happen. And I've pulled this sub out here because the sub's coming from this other channel, and I think I had the sub out of the box actually a lot further away than the one in the box. So if this one was coming in there and then the sub one was happening later, they kind of sounded out of time. So I just wanted to pull all the sub out of this one and just have it that more knocky low end. So you can tell it's really focused around this area, this 90 hertz. And just this virtual channel thing on there again. And then this is the sub kick out of the box. This is what this one sounds like. So just all sub, together they sound like this. So you really need both of them together to make up the full sound. But what's going on with this one is the opposite of the other one. So I'm just pulling out all this like 70, 80, 100 area and just boosting this 40 hertz area. So it's really just focused there. So it's kind of like this one in the box is octave up and this one out of the box is octave down. And then just that thing. And then they're summed together to this kick, to this kick bus channel. And so let's turn all the kick mics on there. So this kick bus channel, I'm just boosting some top end there. Some tape machine. This distressor, it's probably only doing around 3 dB. That same setting as the snare where it's like 6:1. Hey buddy. And that might be something that is automated on in some parts. We've got a limiter to hold it in place. I'm just trying to catch those stray peaks. This is the level, and that's just a little notch there, and that is that's all the kick close mics. And then there's this one kick expander mic, which was some kind of mic, maybe like a 57 out the front of the kick, just gated to come on when the kick hits. So it's just a bit of mono ambience to the kick drum with the other kick sources. It sounds like this. So that makes a pretty big difference. That's all the kick sources there. So I think we've gone over everything except for the toms. Oh, and this kick snare mic, which is placed underneath the snare drum but facing the beater of the kick. So this is the first time I ever recorded one of these kick snare mics You can see I've wrote cool but scary. So it's muted throughout the choruses, and it only comes on in this bridge because I wanted the kick to sound a bit more aggressive in this bridge. So it's kind of like there's no snare bottom in this. So this acts as a snare bottom and just a knocky thing to the kick. And by itself, it sounds like this. So it's a pretty cool sound. I probably should have had it on the whole time, but I'm just pulling all the low end out of it. I'll show you what the low end sounds like in this mic. So there's a lot of it there. It just didn't play nice with the other mics with phasing. So there's not much EQ. I've flipped the phase to get it to sound right against that D12 mic. It's very compressed. Just sounds a bit squishier with that compression. And then just some shaping. You hear that there. And there is that cool knock. I really should have used this. So if we solo the kick. So yeah, that makes a huge difference in that bridge there. Really should have had it on the whole time because it sounds cool. And there's no snare bottom, so I should have had it on just for the sake of having a snare bottom. Alright, so the bussing here, this is where it gets a little bit complicated. So, at the time what I was doing was having a drum bus that goes through distresses. So all the drums are summed and then go into this bus that's compressed quite heavily by distresses. And then there's another version of the drum bus, and then there's this dry bus here, which isn't actually dry in this case. It's still got this compressor on it. But all I use this for is because this distressor bus, all the drums are getting compressed together so hard. If you try and turn up, say, the snare, it doesn't really get any louder. It just kind of gets more compressed. So I have this extra bus that I can just send, like I'll send just the snare through it, an auxiliary of it through this, so I can turn the snare up a bit more if I need to for some parts. So everything is going through this, but then I'll aux send the snare or the kick to this if I need it louder in some parts. And then there is one more drum bus. So the same drum sum that gets sent to this distressor drum bus is getting sent to this Fairchild drum bus. And it's just a really compressed, it's just a parallel smash bus. Just a really quick, punchy drum sound. I don't know, I'll try and solo this bus so you can hear what's going on with it. So yeah, that's what the Fairchild drum bus sounds like. It's just, it's pretty quiet, it's low in the mix, but it's just adding some punch, and especially to the cymbals, it's adding like this punchy, attacky sound to the cymbals, which I really like. And a lot of people like that squashed, flattened cymbal sound that's really controlled. I like the cymbals to have like a lot of punch to them, so it's mainly for that. So let's have a look at the okay, and then all of those drum buses get summed here to the final drum sum, and that has nothing going on. It's just where everything's being summed to. So let's have a listen to all the drums, and I can turn this distresses on and off so you can hear how much the distresses are doing on the drum bus here. A big part of the sound is the distresses, because nothing is compressed individually really. When I turn it off, like, there's no glue and there's no punch to anything. Everything sounds quite flat and boring. So this is where all the excitement is coming from. It's on 6:1 and it's compressing it a fair bit. Not that much, 6 dB. Like, a lot of the times I'll have this distressor on the drum bus on 20:1 and have it compressing like, 14 dB. Actually, I'll show you that. It's not that drastically different. It's just a bit more punchy. So you can hear that's a cool sound too, but for whatever reason I just wanted to go a bit less aggressive on this one. I'll go back to how it was. Sounds a bit boring at 6:1 now, but that's what I did. Alright, so that is all the drums. So when the chorus comes in, this is really typical for me, or actually the bridge in this case, is to have these impact crashes, which is just a recording of 2 crashes being hit, and if they're not there when the chorus comes in, I'll show you, it doesn't have a big impact on the way in, and then there's this explosion called holy shit explosion, which happens. This one's a bit more obvious when this part comes in. You can kind of hear it go like poof, and that's another pretty common thing that I'll do, just to have parts have impact, not in a way that you're like, oh, that was a cool effect, but you just kind of feel like it got bigger. So let's hear this transition how it is with these impacts on. Now let's listen with these impacts off. So boring, right? Kind of ruins the part. You put these back on. Much better. So that's something I'll always do. Like, I'll always try and hit the crashes a lot harder on the downbeats of the chorus, but because it's so compressed in the drum bus, I'll always need to add some kind of impact like that as well. That just sounds like everyone's hitting a bit harder on the first hit of the chorus. Okay, that's everything with the drums now.